Gaza's health ministry says at least 26 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes overnight on Gaza City. It said the strikes had targeted 2 houses. This is the 7th day of violence. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said military action would continue until security is restored. Well, these are some of the latest pictures from Gaza. Israel says the home of the Hamas chief in Gaza was among the latest targets. Palestinian militants have fired more rockets at cities in southern Israel. And the United Nations has summoned the Security Council for an emergency meeting. Our correspondent Helena Wilkinson has the latest developments.
Within seconds, this building in Gaza is reduced to rubble. It was home to journalists from the Associated Press and Al Jazeera TV. An hour earlier, they had been told to evacuate. Israel says the building was a target because of links to Hamas, the militant group that rules Gaza.
Israel is doing everything possible to protect our civilians and keep Palestinian civilians out of harm's way. We demonstrated this yet again today when we warned civilians to vacate the building used by the Hamas terror intelligence. They vacated the premises before the target was destroyed, and that's why you don't hear of casualties from these collapsing terror towers.
There have, though, been civilian casualties on both sides. Early this morning, Israel targeted a house in Gaza that it says belonged to a Hamas leader. Palestinian health officials say that at least 3 people died and many others were injured. In an earlier Israeli attack, Mohammed al-Hadidi lost his wife and 4 young sons. His baby son, Omar, who's just 5 months old, was the only survivor. In Ramat Gan, a suburb of Tel Aviv, a Hamas missile killed a man in his 50s. He was reportedly hit by shrapnel in his apartment. In Sheikh Jarrah, there continues to be anger and tension. Attempts to evict Palestinians from their homes in this area earlier this month helped start the escalation to the conflict. US President Joe Biden has spoken to Israeli and Palestinian leaders ahead of a UN Security Council meeting later today. But with neither side appearing to back down, the quick breakthrough seems a distant prospect. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
Well, the BBC's Paul Adams is in Jerusalem, and I asked him if there's any sign of the conflict coming to an end anytime soon.
Well, you look at the exchanges overnight and you would have to conclude no, but I think there are some signs. There is quite a lot of diplomacy going on at the moment. The American envoy Hadi Amar is in town. He's meeting senior Israeli officials today. Interestingly, he met Arab Israeli leaders last night, it's reported. That's a highly unusual meeting, which he heard their grievances, which aren't just about the situation between Israel and Gaza, but also about the condition of Arabs living in Israel. So that was an interesting aspect of his diplomatic effort. There are also efforts we know involving the Egyptians to try and broker some kind of ceasefire. And we're beginning to hear some reporting here in Israel that suggests that the Israeli government feels that it is reaching the point, and this happens every time an episode like this happens, where it has achieved quite a lot militarily, but on the other side of the ledger, the sense of international outrage is mounting, and the awareness of the effect on the humanitarian situation in Gaza is also mounting, and that at some point those two issues connect, and Israel has to decide that it's done enough and it calls a halt. So there are possible signs that Israel is reaching that point.
As you suggest, Paul, there's a real cyclical pattern to these conflicts between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. And even when this one ends, the likelihood is there'll be another one unless there's some attempt at some sort of lasting solution. But that doesn't look very likely.
No, it looks very, very unlikely at the moment. I mean, there are a couple of things here, Ben. One is, how much damage has Israel done? I mean, clearly it feels that it has killed an awful lot of senior Hamas officials, destroyed these networks of underground tunnels, and some of this damage will be long-lasting and hard to repair. But it will be repaired, and logic and past experience tells you that we could face this situation again. More fundamentally is, where is the political will to see some way out of this? Well, Hamas is an organization condemned as a terror group by Israel, by the United States, by countries in Europe. It does not believe that Israel has a right to exist, and it has a very clear agenda. There is another part of the Palestinian leadership looking on, frankly, from the sidelines during this episode. That is the Palestinian Authority, led by President Mahmoud Abbas, up in Ramallah. But he is a bystander, and he might want negotiations to resume, but he's probably right now more conscious of his political authority among his own people being usurped by Hamas, who have emerged as the kind of defenders of Palestinian honor and Palestinian rights in Jerusalem. So he is in an incredibly weak situation. And so I think overall the prospects for a resumption of meaningful negotiations towards some kind of solution, whether it's the old formula of a two-state solution or something else, those prospects seem unbelievably remote.
That was Paul Adams. Joining us now from Hebron is Palestinian activist Issa Amro. Thank you very much for being with us. Do you see any chance of a ceasefire in the coming hours or days?
I think Israel is really trying to make the Palestinians pay a very high price, especially the civilians in Gaza. The majority of the people who were killed in Gaza were children, women, and elders. Many, I can say, civilian buildings and media offices were leveled and destroyed by the Israeli army. Israel doesn't have any real, let me say, military target in Gaza. They are just trying to, give the Palestinians the indication that don't react, don't do anything, stay silent, and stay in the corner. What was Israel doing in the last 4 years during infamous American administration, during Trump administration, is really bad for the Palestinians. And that's what made the Palestinians in West Bank, in Gaza, in Jerusalem, inside 48 very angry. Let me summarize what Israel did in the last 4 years, and they are doing till now. One of the main things they did, they unified Jerusalem and announced it as the capital of Israel. They started with the annexation plan, to annex West Bank, to annex Hebron, for example, without me as a Palestinian, to their own state. And their annexation didn't stop after Trump left. Their annexation is now, we call it de facto annexation. More infrastructure for the settlements is going on, bridges, roads, more settlements. So Israel continued doing that even after Biden came to the office in the United States. Israel, at the same time, was announced by many organizations, human rights organizations, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, as an apartheid. They issued the nation-state law against the Palestinians inside Israel. They are not equal, the Palestinians, even in their own country. They don't feel equal. They don't get equal rights. House demolition, settler violence, all the time. We are suffering. Really, we were squeezed. We were pushed to the corner by Israel, and Netanyahu and his right-wing government is really getting more power, and we see more extremist, Kahanist,
Okay, well, let's just focus on what's happening in Gaza. You mentioned the word extremists. Israel would say that Hamas are extremists. Hamas are firing rockets into southern Israel. Would you say to Hamas now, stop firing those rockets?
I can say it, let me say openly, that all violence is because of the occupation, because of the oppression, because of the brutality of the Israeli occupation in Al-Aqsa Mosque. You didn't see how the Israeli police treated the Palestinian worshippers, elders, women, children. They went to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They were beaten, they were injured. I saw how the women were treated badly today, yesterday, the day before, and every day in Sheikh Jarrah. They are trying to displace the Palestinians. And I can say that Hamas is a result. Let's go to the roots of the conflict. Let's go to the roots of the problem.
But my question was, would you say to Hamas to stop firing those rockets into southern Israel?
For sure, we want to end the occupation, and I really don't like any kind of violence. But let me say and be clear, I am as a Palestinian in Hebron. I was attacked in the last week by the settlers, by the soldiers, and all this kind of violence should be stopped. But first, we should stop the occupation, stop the settler violence, and make Israel accountable for its occupation and for its apartheid. If we want to end all violence, we should work hard to end the occupation and make Israel accountable for its apartheid and oppression against the Palestinians. That is the main cause of violence, not Hamas, not anybody else. It's about Israel occupying the Palestinians, and we are stateless. It's about Gaza is sieged. In Gaza, they don't have clean water to drink without any violence. They are completely sieged. The Palestinians are really pushed to the corner, so they reacted in this way in West Bank, inside 48, and in Gaza and in Jerusalem. So I told the international community to intervene and put high pressure on the occupation, not on the victims of the occupation.
Okay, Issa Amro, thank you very much for joining us from Hebron. Thank you for your time.